Hi, I'm Mauro Porcini, PepsiCo's Chief Design Officer. Join me for our new series where we dive into the minds of the greatest innovators of our time, with the goal of finding what drives them in their professional journey and in their personal life, trying to uncover the universal truths that unite anyone attempting to have a meaningful impact in the world. This is In Your Shoes. I think it's ultimately inhuman to only see things for their functionality. We want things to be more than that. The desire for beauty is something that is in us and is not trivial. I'm quoting the guest of today. He is one of the most renowned graphic designers in the world. He's recognized for his unorthodox, provocative designs that tweak the status quo and question the designer's role in society. He works across disciplines including design, typography, environmental art, conceptual exhibitions, video and more, often using his own body as a canvas, and is well known for his work in the music industry, including album covers for stars like the Rolling Stones, Lou Reed, Jay-Z, Aerosmith, just to name a few. His work in the music industry earned him 2 Grammy Awards. His TED Talks are inspirational, to say the least. And today we will try to capture some of his thoughts and his dreams, trying to put ourselves in his shoes. Stefan Sagmeister, welcome to In Your Shoes.
Hello, Mauro. Glad to be here.
Hi, Stefan. Such a pleasure to have you with us today. I've been knowing you for a while, but I was preparing for this conversation today, and it's just mind-blowing the amount of thoughts and theories and quotes that you can find online about you and about your vision, not just of design, but of the world in general. So how did it all start? How did you decide to become a graphic designer, and what was that first step in this professional journey?
Well, I'm Austrian, hence the accent. Was born just about 5 miles from the border of Switzerland and Austria. Middle-class family, very normal childhood, quite fine in a small town, pretty town on a lake in the Alps. And was not particularly good in drawing in school. But when I was 15, I changed schools, and there in the new town, joined a small youth magazine, first to write, and then very quickly, because nobody else wanted to do layout there, I took over the layout of that magazine. And because that magazine was also quite involved in organizing concerts for bands and maybe a demonstration here or there, or so it was culturally active, all these activities needed somehow graphic design iterations, posters for this and transparencies for that and so on. And so, because I already did the layout, that was also me who did those things. And I found them enjoyable to do. I liked it much more than I had the writing. And at the same time, I was also in a band, terrible band. But through the band, of course, was very close to album covers. And I thought, well, right now I'm doing these sort of like cultural things for a magazine, but the dream job, of course, would be to design album covers, because by that point of like 15 or so, I understood that this was actually a possibility, that there are people, not so many, but there are few people in the world who actually make their living doing that. And I just thought that would be fabulous.
And how did you start in the music industry, then, the world of... You've been working with some of the most famous music artists in the world.
Well, it took a while. So then I studied, I worked for this company and that company, and then it was only in 93, so I would have been 30 years old then, 31 years old, when I opened my own studio and sort of thought of that initial thought why I became a designer in the first place. So basically 15 years later, I had tried maybe an album cover here and there, but very isolated pieces. But when I opened the studio, I really thought, that would be fun, to keep the studio small and to combine my 2 biggest directional loves, music and design, And I think even though we didn't have a single music client, it said on the first opening card, it said design for the music industry. But it was more sort of like a hope than a fact. And ultimately, I think I saw all the record companies, and many of them said, oh, we'll give you a job, but they never really did. And I think the change came when an album cover that we designed for a friend's band was nominated for a Grammy, and the record company sort of understood, so he cannot just do this for the portfolio, they can also do it in real life and can make it happen. And I think that was the big change. Then a good number of jobs came in. I think the first of the covers that we did for a person that I was a proper fan of would have been Lou Reed, who also, of course, lived very close by. So he literally
Here in New York.
Here in New York, yeah. So the studio was and is on 14th Street, and he lived on 11th Street. So he literally came, one day the doorman rang up and said, I have Lou Reed here for you. And without any, there was no appointment or anything. And I, of course, did not believe it until he actually stood there in real life.
The magic of New York.
Yes. Yeah,
I was not there in those years, but I was talking with one designer that worked here in PepsiCo with me. And he was here, back then, and he told me that when you opened the office in New York, you took a picture of yourself without clothing, and you sent it to everybody, to potential customers, saying, "I have the attributes, let's put it this way, to open a studio in New York." Okay. How much did it change between the Stefan of those years that was starting and the Stefan of today?
Well, this would have been 93, so this is 25. This is, whatever that means, 27 years ago now. So I would hope that I would have changed in the meantime. For one thing, when I got many offers to do this again, I wouldn't do a naked photo shoot now, not because I suddenly, wouldn't dare to, but the joke kind of got old. We did the opening card, which from a pure functionality point of view, obviously worked extremely well because it's almost 3 decades ago and we're still talking about it. Yeah. But also, it was printed as a postcard and maybe sent to 200 people, but ultimately it got reprinted in design magazines all over the world, and that print run was in the tens, possibly in the hundreds of thousands. So from a pure advertising effect point of view, this clearly worked. And it was definitely, at the time, it needed I had to overcome some fears. I remember my girlfriend at the time really advised heavily against it. She thought that I had basically, when we opened the studio, there was one client. And she thought that if I'm literally sending this card out, I'm going to lose that one client. And that just did not happen. What did happen was that a month later, when I visited that client, he had that card pinned up in his office with a little post-it note on it, and the post-it note said, I'm paraphrasing, the only risk is not to take any risks, which of course was perfect, and it definitely encouraged me to here and there, not always because I lose. There's also many times when I don't do anything to overcome my fear, but it definitely encouraged me here and there to go beyond what I would normally do. And that it turns out that in design, or specifically in communication design, this works really, really, really well from a functioning point of view, because if you're in a business where you have the attention of your audience by definition only for a second, or may possibly even a fraction of a second, like in this case, people looking through their mails, getting a ton of postcards, and the people, let's say record companies or clients that I sent this to probably get, or at that point probably got dozens of cards like this every day, then to have some sort of surprise in that card, or possibly even some sort of shock in that card, is a very helpful and efficient strategy.
Yeah. I mean, you are a risk taker by definition. At least this is what we see from outside. I'm sure that there are many risks from what you just told me that you wanted to take, eventually you didn't take.
Yeah.
But if you look back, probably there are many that you decided to take. You often talk about taking the risk and taking action, acting. And today, this is so important when any company or any individual try to drive innovation, to do something different. Now, one of the problems of taking risk is that sometimes you fail and you make mistakes.
Yeah.
Is there any failure, any mistake that you made that you remember today and it was very important because it taught you a lesson and then you started to do things differently after that?
I have to say there were no disasters from times where I had to talk myself into overcoming fear. And we even made a piece of work about that basically said having guts always works out for me, because it became a real pattern that every time that I was at that point, should I really do this? Can I do this? Is this maybe too much? And I did do it. It always went out well. So you would think that from that experience, the fear would just go away and that wouldn't be there. But that's not the case, sadly. Like that's still there. Or maybe positively. Maybe it does keep me from doing completely stupid things here and there.
Mechanism of preservation of the species.
Yes. But I mean, I think that in general, my theory is that fear, of course, comes, like the reason that fear is put so importantly into our brain, it's, even that it has its own little shortcut, the amygdala, where fear gets through much faster than joy ever would, is of course to keep us safe. Mm. And I think that came from, the time for our, prehistoric ancestors, that the brain wanted to make them see that saber-toothed tiger in time. Yeah. I feel, however, that me and many of us, live such safe lives, that those, and also have such safe existence in our work, no saber-toothed tigers attacking ever at all, that to overcome that fear more often would bring me very much likely a more full life in life and a more full working life as well.
Does it make you more happy? And I'm asking this for obvious reason. You have been studying the idea of happiness, investigating that for many, many years. Mm-hmm. You actually directed and acted in your own movie, the Happy film, that I remember I saw it in the premiere in New York City here with you, and it's really a beautiful, beautiful movie that makes you really think about the meaning of life and how to reach happiness. It's a movie I always recommend to everybody. So is this ability and desire to take risk somehow connected to your search for happiness? Do they work together in a way or the other?
I think they do, yes. And there's actually a scene in the film, like in the second part, where I go through these 3 strategies to make myself happier: meditation, cognitive therapy, and drugs. And in the second part, in the cognitive therapy part, the therapist basically tells me that she sees that I'm a person that avoids confrontation, and that maybe I here and there should put myself into a situation where confrontation is necessary, and then or at least in situations where I feel uncomfortable. And I do think that of course immediately is not happy. I mean, I don't want to be more uncomfortable than anybody else. I mean, like, it's uncomfortable is uncomfortable. But I think that the results of this, the possibility to see and learn something new, or if it's applied to work, the possibility to create something new, of course, is much, much higher. And I've once heard a talk to a very young, fantastic Brazilian designer who basically made that his daily modus operandi. He said that if he doesn't have that uncomfortable feeling in his belly, he knows he's just repeating himself. So he used that uncomfortableness as a sign that he's working on something new. And I have to admit, I never really quite got there, because I just hate the uncomfortableness too much. It's like, there's just many days where I also much rather want to be comfortable and work on something that it's, I think my sort of like rule of thumb is that I feel best when I know about half of a job and I don't know the other half. If I know everything, it's really boring, and then I really feel it's just repeating myself. If I know nothing, it just becomes too frightening and I get too anxious. So somewhere in between, I think, is my sweet spot.
And it's pretty clear, I think, to a designer, but there is many people listening to us today that are not designers. And, the question is, why a designer decides to make a movie about happiness?
Well, I since a long time implemented this scheme where I go on a sabbatical every 7 years. So I've done 3 so far, over 7 years of work, 1 year of sabbatical. And in the sabbatical years...
Where did you go?
The first one I stayed in New York because it was so new that I couldn't even think of going anywhere else. Second one, I was in Indonesia, in Bali. The third one, I did 3 locations, Mexico City, Tokyo, and some tiny village in the Austrian Alps. And in the second one, in Indonesia, I was working on furniture that was going into the studio that was in New York that was being renovated while I was in Indonesia. And a friend of mine came to visit and thought that this was sort of a little bit of a waste of my time to do furniture for my own studio, and that I should be working on something that some other people have a benefit from. And I felt that he had a point, and then thought for a while of what that could be. And I had already given a talk on design and happiness, like, is it possible to design something that would increase the happiness of the user? Or is it possible to design something and become happier as a designer? And I felt maybe I should make a bigger project out of it. And of course, I could have done a book, like a big picture book, and it would have been much easier because I know how to do books. We've done many books in the course of the studio. And I felt maybe to make a documentary film would be a bigger challenge. And that it definitely turned out to be. Because I had underestimated how different the world of documentary film really is from communication design. And it was a very, very steep learning curve with sort of ironically, I don't think I've ever worked on any other project where I felt miserable for so long than working during the happy film. And it was, ironic also from the point of view that it was a self-generated project that in some ways, you expect to be kind of fun to work at, much funner for sure than, promotional client projects where you ultimately can do whatever you want. And of course, also many of these freedoms that me and I suspect many other designers are always asking for also come with their own problems. Because if you can do whatever you want or for whatever you can, that really creates its own area of difficulties.
Did it make you more happy, that journey? It was 8 years, am
It was
I wrong?
8 years.
8
Wow,
years.
yeah. It was 8 years. I think the original plan was sort of like probably a 2-year period, and it turned out into an 8-year period, which, looking back, I think was on the one hand a mistake. I think we could have done that also in a much shorter time. At the same time, it would have been a different film because it somehow, probably because of the built-in learning curve, like I just needed to learn so much until a film came out that was watchable. Turned out it's very difficult to even just make a film that an audience can sit through, that's interesting enough that doesn't bore you and doesn't make people turn off after 5 minutes. It was just a very hard and very, very long journey. Now, I have to admit, I haven't seen the film in quite a while. I think it's been 3 years since it's done. But I remember at the end, before we showed it to audiences, both Ben Neighbors and myself, we directed it together, literally had no clue if we made something that was worthwhile or not, or if it was crap or watchable. We did not, like, after being involved with this for 8 years, we literally were clueless. And then once it came out, there were many people, specifically people that we admire. One being you, who thought it was a worthwhile endeavor. And that, of course, originally was the reason to make it. But of course, when you're in it, you forget about that reason again. And it's like about the nitty-gritty of that day of getting that particular shot or that particular edit done.
At the end, is a piece of design, right? It's something
Yes.
that came from your heart, from your mind, and that you're offering to the world. It's between poetry and design. I think in general, they're so connected anyway. How do you feel when you create something, whatever it is, and you see the reaction of people using it and enjoying it and really appreciating what you were able to
fantastic.
create?
I think it's ultimately the reason to be a designer. I think that as a designer, we make things for people. And so, I have always believed that the ultimate judge of your work is the audience. And in the same way, and I think that stayed with us in the studio. So when we design, let's say, an exhibition on beauty, it's extremely important to both Jessica and myself that this exhibition is visited in numbers that sort of make the hard work that we put into it worthwhile. Let's say if we would have a couple of 100 people going to that exhibition, that would be the last exhibition we've ever designed, because then it just makes no sense. But if those visitors think that the exhibition doesn't tell anything to them, or that they leave the exhibition having nothing learned or gained, or haven't been excited, or haven't been touched, or haven't been moved, then we would have to do something else. Then we would definitely think of that exhibition as a failure. I think that's in many ways also some clarity of design, that the functioning part, and I think that every piece of design needs to have a functioning part where it does something, and then it needs to have a joyous part where it touches an audience or that it delights an audience. But the functioning part I like it because it allows for sort of like an easy measurement of its quality. The touchy part is much more difficult to quantify. But, you know, I don't know, let's say if I redesign this can and I push it so hard at the design that I can't drink out of it anymore, that it doesn't allow me to take a sip of liquid, then it stops being a can and it becomes a small sculpture. And then I can look at it from an artistic point of view. Is it a good sculpture or a bad sculpture? But it won't be a piece of design anymore. Even though the quote that you opened this talk with, where I say that, you know, functionality alone or functionalism really is not enough, and I really believe it, I do also believe that design, in order to be called design, needs some sort of function. Even that can be some design can be a fantastic piece of design if its function is extremely low. Like, it depends on how it is used and what it's really supposed to do. You know, meaning there are chairs out there that where the function of sitting, which is the main function of a chair, can be quite uncomfortable, but it can still be an extremely successful chair if it does other things, like, you know, I don't know, enhance my status or tell me something about the world, or it can be quite close to an art piece where it almost pretends to be a chair. So all of these things are possible and still be called excellent design.
I don't remember, I don't know if it's true or not, but I remember a story that a teacher at university when I was in 19, 20 told me when I started to study design about chairs and being uncomfortable. It was very similar to the point you're making, but with a different kind of example. Essentially, you expect a chair to be comfortable, to be good design.
Yeah.
And they were talking about McDonald's and how they were designing their chairs to be not too comfortable so that people wouldn't stay sitting too long. It was the idea of fast food.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's true or not, but it was a very interesting idea of how good design is all about your intent and what you're trying to create for your experience and for your consumer or your target audience in that moment.
And it can go extreme. I mean, I have a friend in Holland, very good designer, Helle Hungarius, you know, and she famously said that there are still people out there who can ruin a perfectly fine vase by putting flowers into it. So she designs a thing that looks like a vase, but really you're not supposed to put flowers in it. And even that has a long precedent in history. Like, I've been to the residence of the Bavarian emperor, and when he ordered his table sets from France, hand painted of course, and so they literally, when they came plates and vessels and cups, they were never thought for actually being eaten from. They immediately went into display, so they were art pieces that took on the shape of design, but really were not meant to be used as pieces of design. So, meaning, I would say that in this case, the function, while it's reduced to being a display piece, it's extremely small, or the main function is zero, meaning the traditional plate function, but of course it does other things.
It's very interesting to hear Stefan Sagmeister talking about functionality and celebrating functionality. I think probably somehow tired of all this conversation about functionality that we have in our world. At a certain point you were like, wait a second, yes, we need that, but we need to celebrate also beauty. And you did a lot of work around the idea of beauty. So can you tell us more about what's the role of beauty in society, the social role of beauty, the meaning of beauty, and your point of view on beauty?
I mean, I can talk about this forever. I'll try to keep it small or to keep it shorter. But I'd say that specifically in the second part of the 20th century, through various directions from history, this idea took place that all we need is function. And that really led to functionalism, where people said, partially because they understood ideas from the Bauhaus wrong, partially because the clients pressed for, let's do this very fast and very cheap, where this idea took hold that if it functions well, it's good. And I think that form follows function was also misinterpreted from the original architect who said it, Louis Sullivan, a Chicago architect, whose own work followed no function whatsoever, or whose own forms very often were ornamental and not extremely functional. But going back to that second part, let's say 1960 to 2000, when housing blocks were developed, where literally the idea was, let's put as many people on as cheaply as possible with a roof over their head. And that led to these gigantic social housing projects pretty much on every continent, north, south, east, west, where people really didn't want to live in. Crime rates went up. Many of them needed to be dynamited in the 80s when they were built in the 60s because they really weren't functioning. They were not fit for human housing. You see that, that's an easy example, but you see that all the way until now, if you look at our social media platforms, the one that's purely functional, that's literally function only, would be Twitter. The one that's much more, where aesthetics play a big role, would be Instagram.
You've been talking about social media. In social media today, you can build your personal branding. Anybody
Sure.
can somehow finally use the platform of communication, sometimes in a good way, sometimes less good. I don't know if it was an intention, if it was planned, but in a way or the other, you are an icon, you are admired and celebrated by many designers all around the world. I have many of my designers here in PepsiCo that just love Stefan Sagmeister. You have a brand. Stefan Sagmeister is a brand. Did you do it on purpose? Did you design your own brand, or it was just the result of the extraordinary work you did over the years?
I can really honestly say, which is sort of odd considering that we created many brands for our clients, that I spent extremely little time and thought on working on our own brand. Meaning we created this little icon, very simple, an S in a circle as a logo, changed it into an ampersand in a circle when Jessica joined. Considering I'm doing now mostly self-generated work again, it's back to the S in the circle. But from a design brand point of view, I spent a number of hours on that thing. Yes, we designed the business card and things like that, but that was pretty much it. Now, of course, we both know that a brand in a commercial sense, of course, is much bigger than some logo design and a couple of stationery items. And ultimately, the brand is basically all the things that other people see in a product and all the attributes. And that was never consciously designed by myself or the studio. And mostly, there were always a couple of goalposts around. One was, let's try to do as good work as we can. Let's try to stay small. Let's try to be kind to other people and ourselves within the studio.
I love this.
Not that we were successful all the time in all of this, but that was sort of the goalpost. And I think from those from those posts, a reputation started to form. Meaning, obviously, I think we've mentioned it, I've been doing this now for a long time. If I count those first posters for that magazine when I was 15 and 57, so that's over 40 years that I've somehow been involved with communicating things through the way of design.
Talking again about social media, recently you have been using your social media to offer project critiques, right? How did you come up with that idea? And I really like this idea of interacting with your fans, with the people that follow you. Can you tell us more about that?
Well, ultimately, the original impetus I stole. It's many years ago, I heard a rumor that Louis Bourgeois, the fantastic artist, is giving a salon every Sunday. And I looked into it and called up her studio, and it turned out to be true. Yes, you could basically get on a list and go there with you had to bring work, and she would dissect it. And I did, and it was fabulous, like one of the best Sunday nights I've ever spent. I mean, she was brutal. 10 people were there, and she told exactly what she thought, completely honest, and she was not taking any prisoners. And so I basically copied that thing pretty much exactly and did this on Monday evenings in the studio. Up to 10 people could come in, and I would critique. We would close the door, and I would critique their work. I had to try to be brutal because it's not really so much in my nature, but I also tried to be as honest as I could. And then my travel schedule became so crazy that it became difficult to hold these Monday evening sessions. And so I started doing it again on Instagram. And of course, on Instagram, it's less personal and it's shorter, and it's, obviously a critique in person is probably more valuable. And at the same time, of course, the Instagram version can be seen by so many people, and it has this fantastic extra bonus that other people can chime in. So I normally, I obviously do the first couple of sentences, and then other people chime in. Often some say, no, I completely disagree with Stefan, I think blah, or I think this or that. But what I really love about it is that I myself try to have constructive criticism, or the kind of criticism that I would like to get, that is helpful to me. Like I try to be not snide or ironic or tear somebody down. And that tone is obviously what is very clearly recognized by other people, and that tone is continuous in the comments. I try not to involve myself in the comments, then it's really sort of like out there. Like I don't come back and say, no, you're wrong. I really think that blah is correct.
Yeah.
It's I do the first iteration, and then people chime in, but those other people's comments are also, with very, very few exceptions, very positive and very sort of like with having the best of the person critiqued in mind. And that's kind of lovely. Yeah. I also think it would be difficult to do this on Twitter. I'm not sure if that would even be possible. So yeah, no, I think it was one of, well, I wanted to say it's one of my better ideas, but it actually wasn't. It's one of Louis Bourgeois' better ideas.
And zooming out, not just on Stefan, account, but thinking about social media in general, crowdsourcing, the global world, do you think, you have two potential point of views on what is happening. On one side, this world may average down everything to a common denominator, and who screams the loudest is going to be the one that's going to be heard. On the other side, the other perspective is that actually this competition on one side and then building on each other ideas may generate actually excellence and a better world and better ideas. What's your point of view on this world we are entering, this global social media driven high-tech world we are in?
I mean, I feel that so much of the negative points of social media have been pointed out. And I agree with many of them. The envy it generates, the aggression and all of that stuff. That I probably would more want to point out the positive parts that it brought about. When I was on sabbatical in Tokyo, I met many of my friends, among them also Italians, who were young designers who were able to make a living in Tokyo purely from their Instagram accounts. They would create some sort of system where they would, post something every second day or maybe every day of things that they would love to do, a project that they would love to do. And from those projects, they got, jobs from Dubai and South Africa and Finland, even though they lived in Tokyo and had a good life in Tokyo. Now, for a no-name young designer, that sort of possibility was just not there before social media. It's like, when I was 24, after I studied, I would have loved to live in Tokyo, but it just wasn't possible. Unless you had rich parents. But if you needed to make your own money, that just was not possible. And so things opened up. I also think that by and large, the world of design has a wider audience through social media. Meaning, when I think of people that contact me that are not designers but clearly follow my account and comment on it, they would have never, or even find that sort of interesting, that they would be interested in an account that talks about this should be current differently and maybe try this typeface instead and possibly make a darker shade of red for this element. Meaning, without any doubt, the general public is much more design-centric and design-savvy now than it was 40 years ago. Meaning, if I look at my parents' generation, my parents couldn't have told you a single typeface if you would have asked them. They probably, I'm not sure if my dad was aware of the fact that typefaces had names and were designed by people. Or if you now if we leave the studio and go on the street and make a little survey, I'm sure everybody that we would meet could tell us the name of 5 typefaces that they have on the computer and like or don't like. It's just, and I think obviously the digitalization played a big role in that, but so does social media, I would say specifically Instagram. There are, I think, advantages through that, because I also think that it is possible that a number of people and non-designers, I'm always most interested in non-designers. As a designer, I'd much rather speak to the general public than to other designers. I think that a number of non-designers basically sharpen their view on how to see or what to look for, or on elements how they are composed and get together on Instagram. Now, that might be not 100% sure. Maybe I'm looking at this issue a little bit with rosy glasses, but I suspect it.
And how do the media, the social media in this case, media, the new media are impacting design, typography, the way we express ourselves through the different design disciplines?
I mean, I think that the entire culture of likes, of course, on the one hand, democratized the whole scene. At the same time, put a weight on some things and took a weight of other things. You know, meaning we all know artists who became through no social media presence of their own, much bigger because they looked good on Instagram. Kusama being one, or I could think Dan Flevin being another. Like, you know, I would say that out of the minimalist artists, at least from my own perspective, Donald Judd or Walter de Maria also were much bigger than Dan Flevin. But now because neon looks so good on Instagram, Dan Flevin seemed to be the leader of that pack. And of course, the influence on fashion is significant, you know. Meaning, I think that on the good part, more colorful, maybe more flashy, maybe more easy to understand concepts get more play, and on the bad side, probably some things that are more subtle, like particular details, probably are lost on the wayside because they don't really look all that great on Instagram.
Yeah. One last question. Your restless search for the new, your investigation of a variety of different topics from beauty to happiness in your own real life and through the world and the lenses of design has been inspiring many people around the world, including myself. What inspires you?
I mean, there's a couple of things that I do all the time. I see a lot and I travel a lot. So I do a good number of talks. We have exhibitions around the world. I see many involved in projects around the world. So basically being in different parts and having that possibility to maybe, even though I might be busy, just spending sometimes, this can be as little as 10 minutes or half an hour in a hotel room, while the day or two before, I saw a lot of things, can be fruitful. I don't really spend all that much time looking at things online, but I do spend a lot of time looking at things in real life. Let's say, like I definitely spend, New York is fantastic for that, spend a whole bunch of time in its museums and galleries. You
guide us through multiple galleries just recently,
yeah.
Right? It was a beautiful afternoon.
But it's, and I say that I don't really do this I have to go out and get inspired. I do it because I think it's a very fun thing to do. It just, meaning, what nicer thing can there be than with a couple of friends go to Chelsea or even the Upper East Side or go to a couple of museum shows together, because that possibility that you see an original piece and are able to look at that piece and discuss it while you're looking at it is, I think, inherently enjoyable, but also only museums or galleries can really offer such a thing. You can't do that at the movies, or you can't do that online. It's this mixture of you're seeing something, but you're with your friends. So it's this mixture of a cultural experience and a personal experience that I think makes it so beautiful.
I'm totally with you. Well, it's been very enjoyable talking about fun and enjoying to talk with you today. Thanks for giving us the possibility to enter in your shoes. As it is tradition now in this podcast, I want to gift you now. We were in your shoes. We would like you to be in our shoes when you are at home.
Oh, fantastic!
Slippers, my Pepsi.
Look, and and they're blue and they fit beautifully to my suit. So
and this is a prototype. So
they are?
Yes.
Yeah,
So
excellent.
talking about prototypes and experimenting.
Wonderful.
Then we will have something better. We'll send it to you, with
Perfect.
this beautiful bag. Thank you again, Stefan.
It was a
Really
pleasure,
a
Mark.
pleasure.
Thank you.